Hello and welcome to our special series of CIB in Conversation, in which I'm talking to the keynote speakers for World Building Congress 2022, which will be in Melbourne, Australia in late June this year. Many thanks to our sponsors of that Congress and also for this series of conversations. Today, I'm really delighted to welcome Alistair Gibb, who I've known for some years personally. He's Emeritus Professor of Construction Engineering Management at Loughborough University. Alistair, hello.
Hello, good to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for making time today, and good to see you've still got Loughborough in the background there.
Yeah, got to keep the flag flying one way or the other.
Yeah, well, we could talk a little bit about what this Emeritus Professor role means, perhaps in a minute.
Yeah.
But I mean, I thought it was interesting. You're at the World Building Congress. You're going to be talking about your lifetime experience and contribution to the world of research in the construction and built environment sector and to CIB, which is a glorious title that we've given you there. I really, really looking forward to hearing more. But let's start by talking about your early career and background, because I know you didn't start in academia. How did you get started?
No, well, I studied civil engineering at university at Loughborough, as it happens, and then left with absolutely no intention of becoming an academic. I wanted to work for a contractor. It was that side of civil engineering that I was interested in, and got my boots on, got them very muddy, and had the privilege of working on a number of projects up in Yorkshire, which is where I came from, and then down in London, did some work in design and so forth, and worked on some fairly large commercial buildings in London. And it was fantastic, and it was a great time to be involved in construction, and I was very pleased to have been given those opportunities. It was really happenstance, you might say, that I ended up shifting, because those of us who are as bald as I am, anyway, might remember in the UK, at least, there was quite a bad recession in the construction industry in the early 1990s. Sorry if you weren't born, but hey, you were, Don, I know.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah.
So as you do, I was sort of flicking through the pages of the New Civil Engineer, the sort of professional magazine, and sort of I came across an advert for Loughborough University. I honestly only looked at it because it was where I'd done my degree. The name at the bottom was the guy who'd been my personal tutor, and they were wanting to recruit somebody who was an industrialist. They didn't want an academic. They wanted somebody with that background, because they were starting a course sponsored by the major contractors in construction management. Construction engineering management actually was the title of the course. And I looked at the sort of personal requirements and so forth, and it was my career written down. So my wife and I came up to Loughborough, stayed with my best man, had a good couple of days there, was interviewed, was offered the job, and I said, well, okay, couple of years, it'll see out the recession, and then we'll see what happens. And that was 1992. So I started in 1993. So yeah, that's how a confirmed industrialist became an academic. And in fairness, I've been an academic so long, I can't really claim to be an industrialist, but I hope that I've kept some of those interests and genes, I think, are still there.
Well, I've always thought in my interactions with you that, yes, it came across that you had that industrial background very strongly indeed. So I don't think you lost them. How far ahead of its time was Loughborough in looking to recruit industrialists into academia like that?
Yeah, I think it was at the time. And I mean, the sad thing, in my view, actually, is that academia generally, including Loughborough, hasn't really continued with that link, because unfortunately, the way that much of our lives are driven by metrics, the metrics for universities, certainly in the UK, are to do with what's seen as academic excellence. And what that means is that, to be quite honest, people like me probably couldn't get a job now, the job that I got, almost 30 years ago. So, and I don't think that's really a choice that places like Loughborough have made. It's been almost squashed into that approach of recruiting people who already have a track record in academia. I mean, I knew nothing about research. I had no publications. that wasn't what they were buying effectively. So yeah, I think it was looking forward, and certainly that course, or those courses, there was a commercial management course as well, sponsored by industry, meant that industry was very much involved, and Loughborough had had that sort of USP in terms of industry links.
And I know you said that perhaps those opportunities aren't available so much anymore, but have you got any tips or advice for young civil engineers early in their career, and how they might think about or contemplate research and or a role in academia in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of options. The switch across to academia is probably still open in some places for those that are really determined to do it. I mean, I've got to say that now, looking back, because you do take a pay cut, you do have a different role, and it takes a bit of time to adjust to that. But I think there are other opportunities for people who have good careers in industry to learn more about the research and to sort of try and bridge that gap. And there are plenty of opportunities for individuals getting involved with research. Most research projects need industry involvement, industry partnership, and so forth. And therefore engaging in those and putting yourself forward as an individual to say to your boss or your boss's boss, I'd like to do this, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to be involved at the forefront. And many of the large organizations are actually looking for those sort of partnerships in order to develop and make sure that we're learning from each other. The other thing is possibly there are some courses there. I'm involved with one at Cambridge University, a master's course, which is full of industry people, most of whom are in their 30s, perhaps early 40s. And they're seconded out, or they're given a sort of block release week away. They're still doing their jobs, and they're learning about some of the things to do with the research, to do with cutting edge technology and so forth, and the broader aspects. It's a little bit like an MBA that people in business might do, a sort of real postgrad MBA. So I'm afraid it's not at Loughborough. I'd like to say it was, but a plug for the Cambridge course or ones like that, so that you're then pushed to actually take a bit of time out and think seriously about other things.
And well, I know you said that one's not at Loughborough. What I do remember Loughborough was very strong on was you had the engineering doctorate program.
Yes.
So is that still an opportunity?
There is an opportunity.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity there. I mean, that actual program, and you're dead right, Don. That was an excellent opportunity. So, for those people who don't know, it's basically an industry-based, industry-focused doctorate done by publication, which actually was the way I did my PhD, was by publication, although not through that particular scheme. So that people still in their jobs are also doing the research work. That has been very successful. And there are still a few opportunities there, but sadly, the way sort of government funding goes and research council funding goes, I think the big opportunity there is not what it once was. But it may come back, and you're right. People who want to actually take that role, and industry, the right partner, the right employer, is very positive about that, because they actually get the academic input for free. It's part of the deal. And that is an excellent opportunity. Yeah, good point.
In one of my previous roles, we had an engineering doctorate, and it was that free academic support that was valuable to our organization. That definitely was one of the benefits that at Constructing Excellence that we benefited from. Well, so here you come into academia back in the day, and we've asked you to talk about your lifetime contribution to research. So what sort of points, perhaps you could share what 2 or 3 of the points that you're thinking of making when we're all together in Melbourne?
Okay. Well, I mean, first to say thanks to the CIB. It really is a privilege to be, to be asked to talk about yourself. Some people say I like talking about myself anyway, so it fits my character. But some of the things, and maybe this is relevant in terms of what's happening in Melbourne, is that having come from an industry background, being involved in those early days through the consortia that were supporting these degree programs, I also kept that link with industry. I mean, I worked for Laing O'Rourke, as is now. My first funded projects were Lang's actually doing the work for an organization called Syria, construction research organization. And I was the jobbing researcher, and sort of things went on from there. So one of the things I've really benefited from is that ongoing link with industry, and accepting or learning the fact there is a tension, and having to be able to address that tension. The tension being, simplistically speaking anyway, industry wants answers, but often doesn't really care too much about how the answers come. They sort of want to trust the people that are telling them, but they don't want to know all the ins and outs of how it was achieved. And academia are often more interested in the process and the rigor than they are in the answers, or in whether the answers are relevant. Now, okay, that's a caricature, I appreciate it, but when you actually get good strong people from industry, leaders in industry, who are of course very bright and very intellectual, they just don't have that academic background, and you put them together with academics who at least have a desire to do something that makes a difference, then you've got a fantastic combination, a fantastic weapon, you might say, in order to move things forward. So that for me has been my practical experience. I can't really think of any research that I've done that has not involved industry, either because there have been projects where we've been funded partly by industry, or we've worked directly with industry in gathering the data and sort of shaping it into something that matters. And a lot of the earlier work with this organization, Syria, was, it was an industry steering board. It was very, they weren't actually interested too much in the academic background. They wanted working documents, toolkits and guidance documents for industry. So that's been certainly let's call it a niche, if you like, that I've been able to exploit over the years. But thankfully it isn't just me, it is happening. You've just got to keep pushing to make it happen. There's not a lot of pointers doing research that only ever gets read by other researchers, really, sadly.
And I mean, how do you think we, perhaps CIB, should be playing a role, or collectively the Global Research Network, in addressing that and improving industry's awareness of the research knowledge base, let alone knowledge and understanding, and moving towards being able to apply it?
Yeah, Don, that's a really good question. I think certainly some of the conferences that I've been involved with, across the board. So, earlier on I was involved with some of the stuff to do with offsite construction, innovation, and so forth, and then latterly very much the health and safety side of things. But some of the best conferences there, the organizers have in a sense, you've got to play both games. So, you've got to realize that for an academic to justify spending time, and particularly to justify traveling, if that involves expense, which it will, as well as the challenges in terms of global warming and so forth, you've got to actually have an outcome that suits the academics. So you need papers that are properly refereed and so forth, and that the process is rigorous, and people acknowledge that, and they are seen as worthy. But also, in order to get the local, particularly the local industrialists involved, you've also got to have something for them as well. And my experience has been, the good conferences have either been jointly organized, so that they are an industry conference with an academic flavor. And one example of that was, we had a health and safety conference in 2000 that the European Construction Institute, which you and I are both aware of. So that's very much an industry body working in engineering, construction, oil and gas, petrochem, and so forth. They actually hosted the conference and we had academic papers that were reviewed, but actually the conference wasn't done as a sort of 10-minute conference presentation, and it was actually done as roundtable discussions where we had rapporteurs who reported on the papers, and people debated the papers. That's one example. And another example was several conferences have been like this, but one actually at RMIT where we're going to for the Congress. Helen Lingard organized a conference there, and the day one was an industry and government day. They launched a paper that the government had paid for. They had industry there, they had government ministers there, they had, you know, the academics were welcome, many of us went along, but it was industry focused. You know, what is this research domain delivering for industry? So it's almost acknowledging that there is a separation, not just trying to sort of muddy the waters and say let's treat everybody the same, but acknowledge that both of those parties, shall we say, have a real role to play, and finding ways of that engagement. It does take work. I don't think it'll happen automatically, but I think, you know, there's certainly plenty of experience within CIB where it has worked very well.
A major part of our audience in Melbourne is going to be early career researchers, Alistair. Mm-hmm. People, yeah. The first 5 years of their career, as it were. What will you be able to share for in terms of advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was just thinking about what to include in my presentation, and you know, I think it's such a crucial opportunity, and to try and balance all the pressures is really tough. And I know I do feel for early career researchers, you know, in terms of the pressures that they're under. You know, clearly teaching is an important part of that, and you know, I think you know, if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be doing our job. So that has to be really important. But I would certainly encourage early career researchers to find an employer first of all who does you know, acknowledge that research is an important part of the job. So choosing an employer, if you're able to do that, that's fine. But yeah, whether or not you have that is really taking advantage of those opportunities. Okay, so as I said, I came into academia, you know, late from an industry background, but I started from you know, zero. And the first CIB conference I went to actually was a health and safety conference, and I presented 4 papers. I was criticized by my academic colleagues because why have you done 4 papers? Because you must focus, you must focus, you must focus.
Right.
But I was flying flags.
Yeah.
And those 4 papers were actually based on final year dissertations from undergraduate students. So it wasn't research funding, it wasn't you know, major projects, but it was some, you know, people who wanted to be in industry. It was a sponsored course. It was they'd been out in industry for the year, but there were people who wanted to deal with real issues, and I just helped them craft them into conference papers. Now, they probably weren't academically the best papers that have ever been produced, but hey, you know, for me, it was a way of starting off. So making the most of those opportunities, and if you can get involved in funded research, that's fine. Certainly exploit your industry links. You know, keep up with your alumni. They go out into industry, and at least for a few years, as long as you've treated them right, they will love you. You know, and they will be proud of their university, whatever it is. So, you know, keep in touch with them. Go and visit them. Find out what they're doing. Find out, you know, and use them to get an access perhaps into their sort of technical department or innovation department or whatever it might be. So I think it's just, you know, being willing to start small, but look for building those things together. And I think one of the challenges, and I think I will try and include this in my talk, one of the challenges of the traditional route into academia, which is the dominant route, is that the PhD process in most countries narrows you down so much that you have to focus on a very small area because you have to demonstrate that you have contributed to knowledge. And you can't just say, I've contributed to knowledge across the whole sector in every single topic. And the trouble then is that you have this very narrow perspective, which is important, and I'm not knocking that for in its own right. But then you've got to say, well, okay, am I just going to focus on, I don't know, the stress calculations of multi-strand cables in suspension bridges, and that's all I'm ever going to do? Or am I going to say, well, how else can I apply the knowledge I've learned and the research acumen that I've developed to these other areas? And therefore, it's that willingness, I think, to almost, to some extent, fight against that. You must carry on along that narrow area because you are the world expert in this really tiny area. Because if you do that, unless you're really lucky and that area happens to be where the funding is, then it's a tough call. It really is. So I'm not saying throw that away, but take those opportunities. Certainly work with your alumni, work with students, try and get as good links in with industry as possible. Invite them in for to help you with the lectures. All of those things that you've got to work at it, but I think there's benefits both ways, without a doubt. So cope with the workload, cope with the hassle, cope with the politics and all of those things. And hey, I'm sure half the audience will be turning around saying it's okay for you to say that, you old geezer. But
and I can see, I know you didn't come from that background, but I can see that you followed your own research projects ranging from 3D printing to, as you mentioned, occupational health and safety and welfare to, I remember one of your early books on offsite construction. So you've certainly had a very broad agenda for your own research in your career. And I like that because I think you see different angles of things. And I think the industry has specialists in it, but there's plenty of people, particularly on the contractor side, who need to understand a little bit about everything, really. And possibly that your portfolio has reflected your industry background. And
it's possibly just worth mentioning that. I mean, I got into health and safety because my then boss, Professor Ron McCaffer, burst into my office, Glaswegian being that he was. Gibb, what do you know about health and safety? Sorry about the accent. And I said, well, Ron, not a lot, but probably as much as anybody else, if not more, because I've just come out of construction. And it basically wanted me to take the minutes of the Safety, Health and Environment Task Force for the European Construction Institute. So I went into that with absolutely no sort of academic background in health and safety and sat there in this room full of senior people from leading organizations in engineering construction. And my jaw dropped. They had so many ideas, so much they wanted to achieve, and I was Mr. Fix-It. I mean, I said, well, okay, I can do that. I'll go away and we'll produce this and we'll do that. And really, because there is so much knowledge and so much experience in industry that if you're willing to do the graft. So I had to take minutes. And that's not the most exciting thing, but you sat there thinking, wow, what opportunities there are here. So yeah, it's that opportunity, or taking those opportunities, I think, that's really crucial.
And you clearly have done, and I mean, you've been an advisor to all sorts of organizations, including government and professional bodies and so on and so forth. How do you get into that? And should early career researchers be sort of looking to build their relationships with policymakers and professional bodies as well?
Good question, Don. And in some ways a tough one. I think you've got to play to whatever your strengths are. I mean, some people play rooms exceptionally well. You see some I'll use the word operators. I don't necessarily mean that negatively, but you'll see people who will actually work a room of people and will go around and introduce themselves and so forth. And that's certainly important. And remembering people, and this sounds so basic, but remembering people's names. It used to be collecting business cards. Now, to some extent, that's a bit out of date. But if you go somewhere where there are people from government or industry or whatever, then make sure you introduce yourself. You've got something to say. You ask intelligent questions of them, and you follow them up so that you make sure you end up with their business card, which is what I used to do. Now, if that ends up being electronically, then you've got to find a way of finding them on LinkedIn and sending them a message within a day of meeting them. I mean, there are some very sort of nitty-gritty practical ways of doing that. And also get yourself to those events where industry are speaking. There's another very simple but very effective way of doing that. If you have an opportunity at an event, whatever the event is, listen really well to the keynote speaker. And when they ask for questions, make sure your hand's up first. Tell them who you are, even if they don't ask you. And never, never, never use it as a sort of preaching opportunity of saying how wonderful you are, but just ask a really good question. And if you say, hi, I'm Alistair Gibb from Loughborough University, and I was really interested in what you said about this, and I wondered if you could explain more about that, and then shut up, sit down, and then people will know your name, and they'll know that you're thinking about it and you've listened to them. Now, that seems so sort of contrived, but it works. And so I think those sort of things and taking those opportunities. Another thing possibly that I would share is that you're only as good as your last job. I think that's true in industry as well. But if you get a funded opportunity to do some work or whatever opportunity, you're using industry's time, even if they're not paying you, pound notes or dollars or whatever. Make sure you produce something that's useful. Make sure you actually do something and produce it well, and not just say, well, I haven't got time to do that because I've got to go on to the next job. And I do have evidence that our team at Loughborough won some commissions from people like the health and safety executive, because somebody in a senior level said, these people will do a good job, and they'll produce it on time, and they'll produce something the industry wants to hear. Now, it's that sort of thing which you only get by really putting effort. And as an academic, you need to put effort into the things that don't count towards your academic credibility. You need both. You need academic credibility, you need the papers in the journals, but you also need to produce something which industry can go away and read, and they're not the same thing. So it's hard work, but the opportunities are there.
Alistair, fabulous advice, thank you. And you've given a great flavour of how interesting and useful your keynote session will be in Melbourne. Before we finish, how would you describe the value of CIB and the part it's played in the development of your career?
I mean, CIB for me has been very important. As I mentioned, the first conference I went to with those, those 4 papers, and involvement with that working commission, and ultimately where I was coordinator, meeting those people, and also being able to use that, I'll be quite honest, unashamedly in my CV, so that you have got international networks. You can say that. Papers, we have produced a few papers across international boundaries, which all count. So use that, but also and this is a challenge, I think, given that we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, and I think for lots of us, and this is an important issue for lots of us, we are perhaps thinking, well, can I really justify flying here or going there or whatever? But that being said, it is about relationships. It's about people. And going to conferences and presenting your paper is one thing, but going to conferences and meeting people and knowing that you're connecting there with the people who really are experts in their field, and that's the sort of opportunity that you can't really get just sat behind your desk. Now, I'm all for the electronic ways of achieving that, and we ought to think more about doing that. But if we do that at the expense of people and relationships, then we've missed a chance. So whether it's electronically or certainly face to face, we've got to make the most of those relationships.
Thank you. And I mean, what would your message be for to me at CIB in terms of what we need to do better? Potentially to respond to that challenge.
Well, I think it's finding a way in the environment that we're in, the changing environment that we're in, of keeping those interactions alive, and again, perhaps recognizing the challenges for large parts of the world for whom paying a sort of normal conference fee is really exorbitant for many countries. Making those opportunities, taking those opportunities. Whether that's travel bursaries and so forth, whatever it might be, again, emphasizing the benefits to to new researchers, to PhD students or grad students, as the Americans would call them, and finding ways of getting them. But also, for instance, and I know this already happens, it might not be feasible for many people to travel across the world to a conference or a congress. But what's really sad to me, occasionally, when I've gone to a conference in a particular place, where the other universities and the industry in that area are not engaged. We've got to make the most, and I know that this already happens, so more power to your elbow, Don. But make sure that those local people and regional people, let's spread it out beyond the city or whatever, the regional people know it's going on and want to be involved. And then if you do that and make sure that you don't always stay in one particular hemisphere or continent, then and you work on those people afterwards, so that you've got some follow-up for them and some way of them perhaps linking into the next one, maybe remotely or virtually, then you've got that opportunity. So it's a tension between both the cost and the environmental impact of travel, and acknowledging that, but making the most of those people who will travel and the region, and then following them up and finding ways of continuing that engagement.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. Before I let you go, I've got one final question that I ask everybody in CIB in conversation, and that's around something called the top opportunity. So I'm asking you, what's your key message, a key challenge that politicians and policymakers or industry practitioners, or any combination of those, what's the top message that you'd want to give those sorts of people around the world, and that perhaps we might develop a little bit more even in Melbourne?
Well, I think for me, and again, perhaps obvious from what I'm saying here, is that don't sort of turn your back on academia. It's a two-way thing, and I appreciate that. And I've already said, as academics, we need to work hard on that. But one of the things I've written down as part of my notes for my talk really is, don't cut the umbilical cord. And most people in the industry, almost all people in industry or in government and policymakers, have come through a university system around the world. That is the game we're in. Mm. But if you leave that, and then not just your own university, but academia more generally, and then strive off and say, okay, that's completely irrelevant, I learnt a little bit, I got my job, and I'm not interested, you're really missing a trick. And I think the more the academics can be used in helping policy makers, in helping industry, and so forth, the more they will have to respond to those opportunities. Whereas, and the sad reality is, some of the policy opportunities are so constrained, the research in some linked to some policies are so constrained that academics can't respond to them. And therefore they tend to get done by consultants, some of whom are very, very good, don't get me wrong, but some of whom don't appreciate the sort of breadth of background that comes out of many of our universities. And therefore it's that sort of, again, universities need to realize that, but so do policymakers. If you want someone to really worry a problem, not just find a quick answer, then you need people who are used to working like that, but you need to find ways of doing that. You mentioned the engineering doctorate system at Loughborough and other places. That sort of thing, where if you've got a big enough problem, you're not going to solve it in 3 weeks. Yeah. You might not want 30 years, but can you do it in a year or 18 months? Those sort of things will handle maybe in the 3-year engineering doctorate, 3 separate or 4 separate problems, but really worry them, and therefore it's taking advantage of those, fund them, find ways of doing it. And the leaders in industry are doing that in all sorts of different ways. I would encourage that, policymakers, leaders, industrial leaders, and so forth.
Well, Alistair, thank you very much indeed. I suspect the value of research and how we promote it and communicate it will be a running theme throughout the World Building Congress. And so thank you for raising it. today. I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fabulous to catch up. I'm sure for our viewers, it's been a good teaser for what you're going to have to say in June, and I very much look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And to all our viewers, thank you for watching. I hope you're going to be able to join us in Melbourne, or failing that, by on the online engagement in World Building Congress 2022, where you'll get to hear from Alistair and talk to him in the network, in the side margins, I'm sure. And with that, I look forward to seeing you in June, and goodbye for now.